The Varkai Empire had a wall. It stood in the Great Council Hall on their homeworld. Work Prime, 30 meters long, 3 meters high, carved from black volcanic stone, polished by so many generations that it shone like the surface of a dark lake. In the quiet afternoon hours, when the light from Work Prime's sun fell through the hall's high windows at the perfect angle, the wall seemed almost alive. Upon it were names 164 names, each carved by hand into the stone and filled with molten gold. These were the names of civilizations, of empires. Each of them was now eradicated, either absorbed by the Varkai Empire as conquered territory or destroyed so thoroughly that nothing remained but ruins and memories. The Varkai called it the Wall of Proof, not the Wall of Glory, not the Wall of Victory. Those names would have seemed too emotional, too theatrical, and the Varkai were not an emotional or theatrical people. They were precise, they were calculated. The wall was proof, plain and simple. Proof that their strategy worked, proof that their warships were the best ever built, proof that their soldiers were the best trained in the known galaxy, proof that 164 times the Varkai had met an enemy in open battle, and 164 times the enemy had lost. Each name was accompanied by a ceremony. After the conquest was complete, after the last enemy ship had gone dark or surrendered, after the fall of the planet, the master artisan was brought into the council hall. He took his tools and spent 3 days carving the new name into the stone. Perfectly proportional letters, perfectly set. Then, the gold was poured. Only then would the wall increase by one more name. Only then would the celebrations begin. Supreme Commander Dath had attended 22 such ceremonies in his lifetime. He had personally participated in 11 campaigns, overseeing others from his command chair or through reports that crossed his desk. He was old now. His skin had faded from the deep blue of his youth to a gray-silver hue that marked a Varkai who had passed 7 decades of life. His body, however, was still strong. His mind was sharper than most men half his age. Each morning, before the meetings, briefings, and the endless duties of commanding the greatest military empire in the galaxy, Dath walked along the wall. He did so in solitude. He began with the first name, the Dominion of Harki, conquered even before his grandfather was born, and walked slowly to the end to the 164th name, the Sovereignty of Falori, his most recent campaign and his most recent victory. Then, he would stop and look at the empty space after the last name. There was always space for more. He was finishing his walk on an ordinary morning when his senior adjutant entered the hall with a quick gait, the kind that meant news. The adjutant was barely 30, his uniform was impeccable, and his movements were careful, like someone who had precisely learned how to present information to a superior officer without wasting a word. Supreme Commander, the Deep Survey Group from Sector 44 has returned. Dath continued to look at the wall. Report. 1 civilization discovered. A single-planet species. They call themselves humanity. Their world is called Earth. The 3rd planet from a yellow star, approximately 700 light-years from our current outer border. A single planet. Dath turned. They have not colonized beyond their star system. They have a very small number of research stations on neighboring planets. Nothing that could be called a military presence. No colonies. Their entire civilization exists on one world. Supreme Commander Dath paused for a moment. What weapons do they have? Predominantly chemical rocket weaponry. Early prototypes of directed energy weapons are still in development. Missiles of limited range. Their warships are small. Our analysts say their largest warship is roughly the same size as our standard transport carrier. Nothing more. Nothing with the capability for faster-than-light speeds, although they appear to be researching it. Population is approximately 8 billion. A pause. Then, Dath made a low, rumbling sound, which was the Varkai equivalent of laughter. He turned back to the wall, found the empty gold space after the 164th name, and stared at it. "Show me," he said. The adjutant took out a tablet and activated its holographic display. Images bloomed in the air. A blue-green world, shrouded in white clouds beautiful from orbit, as water-rich worlds often were. Thin metal ships floating in orbit like toys. City lights shimmering on the dark side of the planet. Population maps, resource estimates, summaries of military power. Dath studied each image slowly. He looked for a long time at the ships, then at the data on the weapons, then at the orbital defensive platforms, which were small and few. Their history, he said. The survey group obtained significant amounts of their data. Our translators are still working on most of it, but the summary is clear. This is a warlike species. They have fought one another for most of their recorded history. Many wars, some devastating. They nearly destroyed their own planet twice, as far as we can identify. But currently they are moving toward a unified planetary government and seem to cooperate on defense matters even within their political differences. Zethgart set the tablet aside and clasped his hands behind his back. He walked slowly across the hall, saying nothing. His adjutant waited. He had learned not to fill Zethgart's silence. A warlike species that cannot leave its system, Zethgart finally said. A species that has spent centuries perfecting the art of killing one another and has nothing more than a transport carrier for a warship. He stopped. This will be the easiest campaign we have ever conducted. Our analysts estimate 3 to 7 days from first contact to total capitulation. Supreme Commander. And that estimate seems generous, very generous. Zethgart looked once more at the wall, at the 164 golden names, at the empty space that waited. Call the council, he said. We will formalize this and appoint a fleet commander. The council gathered 3 days later. 17 senior members of the military and political leadership of the Varkai sat at a long table in the hall. Zethgart stood at the head of the table and presented the survey data himself, which was unusual. Usually, this was the task of junior staff, but this was the 165th campaign. He wanted to see the faces of the council when they realized what they were dealing with. He was not disappointed. By the time the presentation ended, several members of the council were already smiling. Fleet Councilor Marin, the oldest member of the council, had participated in 9 campaigns. He looked at the image of Earth hanging in the holographic display above the table, at its small ships and limited weapons, and said what several people were thinking. We are sending a full fleet for this? We are, said Zethgart. Supreme Commander, with all respect, a task force of 10 ships will handle this in the same amount of time. Why allocate 40 warships to a civilization that cannot threaten us? Because they are unknown, and the unknown is the only thing that has ever harmed us. The hall was quiet. The senior members of the council nodded. The younger ones listened intently, realizing they were being taught something. Fleet Councilor Marin said nothing more. The vote was unanimous. A full battle fleet of 40 warships would be sent to the human solar system. Fleet Commander Dath was appointed, the best active fleet commander of the Varkai, winner of 4 campaigns without the loss of a single ship to enemy fire. Some people thought the assignment of Dath to a small mission was excessive. Zethgart considered it appropriate. The 165th victory would be recorded in the history of all Varkai. He wanted it handled with absolute perfection. The fleet assembled at the staging point over the next 3 weeks. 40 warships, from fast patrol destroyers to 4 heavy dreadnoughts capable of shattering the moon's surface, carrier ships with fighter complements, supply ships, and 6 landing transports carrying a total of 120,000 Varkai infantry, equipped with the best infantry weaponry their empire could produce. Fleet Commander Dath inspected his forces from the observation deck of his flagship dreadnought, a carrier he named the Fist of Arkai. He was a lean man, silent, with a face that gave nothing away. He had read every report the survey group had filed on Earth. He had read the translated parts of human history. He had studied their ships, their weapons, and their military doctrine in as much detail as the survey data allowed. Then he put it all aside and wrote his battle plan on 4 pages, because that was all that was required. He put his captains through the plan one by one. Most of them had the professional calm of experienced officers. A few young captains found it harder to hide their feelings, which were that this mission required no special planning. One of his captains, a young man named Sirak, who was participating in his first campaign, said directly, "Fleet Commander, their ships will not survive a single engagement with even our lightest destroyer. Their weapons cannot penetrate our armor. Their orbital stations are not designed for combat." He clears his throat. "By any measure, this is." "Finish the thought carefully," Dath said. Sirak pondered. "A formality, sir." Dath looked at him for a moment. "Do you know why the Varkai have never lost a campaign? It is our superior technology, and it is because we do not treat any campaign as a formality." Dath's voice was level and calm, not angry, just confident. "Every enemy we have ever fought believed they had something worth fighting for. Every civilization we have ever encountered surprised us in at least one unexpected way. You will treat these humans as capable opponents until they are defeated and their surrender is in my hand. Then, you may call it a formality." Captain Sirak straightened. Yes, Fleet Commander. After the captains were dismissed, Dath stood alone on the observation deck and looked at his fleet. 40 ships hanging against the backdrop of the stars, silent and vast, their navigation lights blinking in the dark. He thought about the files of human history, about the wars, about how they described their own wars, sometimes with horror, but also with a strange pride, about how they wrote of those who continued to fight when everything said they should stop, about how they honored people who refused to surrender even when surrender was the logical choice. Stubborn, he thought. They are a stubborn species. Stubbornness was not a weapon. He reminded himself of that. All ships ready. Fleet Commander, his communications officer said in his earpiece. Dath turned away from the window and walked to his command chair. He settled into it, opened the navigation display, and confirmed the course to the human solar system. 17 days. All ships begin the transit, he said. The 40 warships of the Varkai battle group began to move. At first, slowly, their massive engines gathered power, then faster, lining up in the precise formation required by Dath's battle plan. They moved with the quiet confidence of those who had done this many times before, of those who had never lost. Behind them, Work Prime. The wall of proof stood in the great council hall. The place at the end waited. In a solar system 700 light-years away, a blue-green planet rotated in the light of a yellow sun. Its oceans shimmered. Its cloud cover shifted. Its city lights turned on as the dark side turned toward evening. It knew nothing, or at least, so the Varkai believed. In 17 days, something was moving through the darkness of space, and it was very sure of itself. The signal reached Earth 14 days after the Varkai fleet left its staging point. It came on a frequency that no human receiver had ever caught before. It came from far away, from deep space, beyond the solar system, beyond the listening station that humanity had placed on the outer planets, beyond all the sensors that Earth's defensive network had built over the last 40 years. At first, it was weak, just a ghostly signal that automated systems marked as unusual. Within 3 hours, the signal became strong enough for analysis. Within 5 hours, it became clear that it was not coming from any known human installation. Within 8 hours, the Deep Space Network at Lunar Station 7 triangulated its source and confirmed what the senior analysts at the Coordination Center for Defense in Geneva had already suspected. The signal was coming from beyond the solar system and was moving toward them. Defense Director Elena Vasquez was in the middle of a budget meeting when her deputy appeared in the doorway of the conference hall with an expression she had learned to read over 15 years of working with him. That expression meant that everything else could wait. She excused herself and followed him into the corridor. He handed her a tablet. She read it once, quickly. Then she read it again, slowly. Then she handed it back and for a moment froze with her eyes focused on nothing. "How long have we known?" she said. "The analysis team confirmed it 4 hours ago. They wanted to be absolutely sure before raising the level." "Good. That was the right decision." She began to walk. "Give me full signal data, triangulation data, and all the analysts who worked on Project Shepherd. Right now. And connect me with General Kane on the secure line." "The call is already made, Director. He is waiting." She nodded and continued to walk. Vasquez was 47 years old. She had dark hair, which she cut short because she had no patience for things that required maintenance. She had spent her career in planetary defense, working her way up from a junior signal analyst in the early days of Earth's Unified Defense Program to Director of Global Defense Coordination, the most senior military position on the planet. She was known for 2 things. She never panicked, and she was almost always right. Right now, she was thinking about something that happened 31 years ago, when she was 16 years old and sitting in a classroom in Buenos Aires. Her teacher had written a question on the board. "What is the most important lesson history has ever taught?" Students gave the usual answers. "Never start a war you cannot win. Power corrupts. Unite or fall." Her teacher nodded politely to all of them. Then the teacher said, "The most important lesson history has ever taught is this. The victor is the one who prepares. Not the strongest, not the largest, not the most advanced, the one who was prepared." Vasquez remembered this. Moreover, she had built her career on it. The Defense Coordination Center was buried 200 meters under Geneva in a complex that had taken years to build and officially did not exist in any public records. Its full name, known only to about 3,000 people on the planet, was the Integrated Planetary Defense Coordination and Response Center. Everyone who worked there called it the Hole. Vasquez reached the hole after 40 minutes. General Marcus Kane was already there, standing over the main tactical display table with 3 senior analysts. Kane was a large man, dark-skinned, with a physical stillness that came from decades of military training. He had commanded Earth's unified defense forces for 6 years. He and Vasquez had worked together most of that time. They disagreed on much and trusted each other completely. "The signal has increased in strength again over the last hour," Kane said as a greeting. "The triangulation is solid. Multiple sources converge on one point of origin, ship-class energy signatures. How far?" 3 days to the outer edge of the system. At current speed, they will cross the heliopause in 72 hours. The inner solar system about 5 days after that. Vasquez looked at the display. A red marker was slowly moving toward the center of the map, toward the small blue circle representing Earth. She looked at it for a moment, breathing slowly. "Is Shepard ready?" she said. Kane looked at her. The analysts near him found something to look at in another part of the room. "Director," Kane said cautiously, "Shepard has been in operational testing for 14 months. It has never been tested in real combat conditions. We do not know if it is ready." He paused for a moment. "Dr. Patel says yes. Then it is ready." She walked to a chair and sat at the table. "Call Patel, and I need the entire Shepard team within 6 hours. And Marcus." She looked at him. "Start the activation of contingency protocols. All of them." Kane nodded once and began giving orders. Over the next 2 hours, Vasquez sat at the desk and read files. Not signal data, not tactical projections, not energy readings. She was reading history files she had compiled herself over many years. Whenever she had time to think about the question that occupied her thoughts for most of her professional life. What will happen if something comes for Earth? Not an asteroid, not a wandering artificial intelligence, but something that chose to come, something with ships and weapons and the intent to conquer. The files she had compiled in response to this question were detailed, comprehensive, 30 years of reading, researching, and planning stored in an encrypted database that no one else could access. Mostly, they were history files, not human history, but alien history. It all started with the first confirmed alien signal, received 18 years ago. A weak transmission, eventually identified as the automatic beacon of a dead civilization. But it told Earth's analysts 2 things. There were other civilizations, and at least one of them was dead. For a long time, humanity argued whether that dead civilization had died on its own or had been killed. The debate was never fully resolved. Then, 11 years ago, a second signal, stronger, clearly some kind of communication impossible to decipher at first. But within the next 3 years, humanity's best linguists and mathematicians cracked most of it. What they found changed everything. It was a warning, left by a species that called itself the Sulari, a long, detailed warning, broadcast on a frequency that would eventually reach every technological civilization in the galaxy, assuming those civilizations had enough time to receive and decipher it. The Sulhari had been a spacefaring species for over 1,000 years. They had colonies on 20 worlds. They had expanded cautiously and peacefully for centuries. Then, something came for them, the Varkai. The Sulhari transmission described them in detail, their ships, their tactics, their weapons, their social structure, their method of conquest. The transmission ended in the middle of a sentence, as if the last transmitter had been destroyed. Until now. That transmission started Project Shepard. Dr. Ariana Patel arrived at the Hole 5 hours after Vasquez's call. He was 2 years old. He was small and thin, with the distracted look of a man whose mind was always 3 problems ahead of the conversation. He was the most important person on the planet, a fact that quietly didn't sit well with him. He led a team of 500 scientists and engineers who had spent the last 11 years building something that had never been built before. Vasquez met him at the entrance to the main operations hall. She skipped the greeting. "The signal is confirmed," she said. "It matches the ship signatures in the Sulari records." A ship class approaching from the direction indicated in the Sulhari records as Varkai territory. Patel opened the signal data on his tablet. He remained silent for a long time, scrolling through the numbers. Then he set the tablet aside and rubbed his eyes. "We knew this day might come," he said. "We were building for it," said Vasquez. "Is it ready, Ariana?" A real answer, not one from the test reports. Patel pondered for a moment. A long pause followed. "Yes," he said. "But Director, what we built was designed based on the Sulhari records and our analysis of physical principles. We have never seen Varkai ships live. We have never tested against their real materials or their real shielding. There are variables we cannot account for. There always are. Yes, he paused. The principles are sound. The engineering is too. Everything we understand says it will work. He looked at her intently. But I want you to understand that we will learn things we don't know once the shooting starts. I understand. Vasquez turned back to the tactical display. Get your team settled. I need full readiness reports every 4 hours. Patel nodded and walked away. General Kane appeared at her shoulder. Contingency protocols are activated. We have started a quiet evacuation of the most vulnerable surface positions. Public information protocols are ready to use. When will you give the order? Not yet, said Vasquez. I want to wait until we get a clearer picture of their approach and intentions. The last thing we need is for 8 billion people to panic before we know what we are dealing with. Kane accepted this. He had learned not to argue with Vasquez's timing. She was almost always right about timing. Over the next 48 hours, the hole became the nerve center of everything. The signal from the approaching fleet grew stronger by the hour. Better resolution of energy readings meant a better count of the ships. 40 warships, huge by any standard against which Earth had ever measured itself. The 4 strongest signatures clearly belonged to dreadnoughts, a class of warship the Sulari had described in detail in their records. Ships so large they were intended to punch through a planet's atmospheric shield with prolonged bombardment. Analysts were careful in their wording when reporting these numbers. Some of them were less careful in the corridors, where Vasquez sometimes heard a word she had specifically asked people not to use. Impossible. She understood why they were saying it. She had said it herself 11 years ago, reading the Sulari records for the first time. 40 warships from a civilization that had defeated 164 other civilizations arriving at a planet that, as far as anyone knew, had never fought a battle beyond its own atmosphere. By any rational measure, it was impossible to survive. But Vasquez hadn't spent 30 years preparing for rational measures. She had spent 30 years preparing for a real battle. And a real battle, as she had always believed, was never decided by who had the better weapons on paper. It was decided by who thought about winning the hardest. She stood at the tactical display on the last night before the Varkai fleet would enter the outer solar system. The hall around her was quiet. Most of the staff had rotated out to rest. The night watch moved slowly, checking their posts, updating their data. On the display, the red marker moved steadily, patiently, confidently behind Vasquez. On a second auxiliary display that she had quietly left on, an image played continuously. It was from the Sulari records, a planet the Sulari had described in their warning, a third world they had tried to protect from the Varkai, a world that had more warships than Earth, and significantly so, a more advanced civilization, better weapons, more experience in space combat. The Varkai had turned it into a scorched ruin in 11 days. She looked at it with a long gaze. Then she turned back to the tactical display. She thought about her teacher's question 31 years ago. The victor is the one who prepares. Director. The night watch officer's voice was quiet. The fleet has just crossed the outer heliopause marker. They are inside the system. Vasquez straightened. Declare full readiness, she said. Wake everyone. In an instant, alarms began to sound in the hall, soft but clear. People woke up, came to their posts, took their places. Vasquez looked at the red marker on the tactical display. The fleet was still moving with the same steady, patient confidence. She had one thought, very clear and very calm. They have no idea what is waiting for them. And she smiled. The Varkai fleet crossed into the human solar system on a Tuesday. No one on Earth had planned for it. That was just how the numbers worked out when you factored in transit speed and distances. Tuesday, gray and cold over Geneva, with light rain falling on the roof of the building above the hall, some 200 meters above Vasquez's head. The first thing Fleet Commander Dath did after his navigation officer confirmed they had crossed the border of the outer system was order a full sensor sweep. Standard procedure. Always know your battlefield before entering it. The results returned within the hour. Dath sat in his command chair and studied them carefully. His senior tactical officer, a veteran named Rose who had served in 3 campaigns, stood beside him and said nothing while Dath read. Rose had learned that Dath liked silence when he was processing data. The sweep showed what the survey group had shown him. 1 inhabited world, the 3rd from the yellow star. A few orbital stations, none of which were heavily armed. A few small defensive platforms. A scattering of small installations on other planets and moons. A handful of small warships in various positions around the inner system. The sensor sweep also showed something the survey group hadn't included in their reports. "What are these readings here?" said Dath. He pointed to a dense cluster of faint energy signals that seemed to be distributed throughout the inner system in a wide, loosely structured pattern. They were weak, easy to miss, something that a less attentive sensor operator might have dismissed as interference. Ross leaned over the display. He studied it. Low-power signatures, very small individual sources widely spaced. He ran the data through an analysis system for a moment. They could be debris, meteoroid material. Some of these signals resemble interference patterns we get in asteroid belts. Are there asteroids in this region? No significant concentration, sir. Dath looked at the readings for another moment. Then he looked up at the main view screen. The solar system was spread out before him, unimaginably huge, with a yellow star bright in the center. "Mark them," he said. "Monitor these readings as we advance. I want to know if they change." "Yes, Fleet Commander." Ross marked the readings. The data analysis group was notified. They would keep an eye on it. Then Dath gave the order to begin the advance to the inner system, and the fleet moved, and the marked readings remained in his head like small things sometimes do. Present, but not urgent, like a pebble in a boot that wasn't sharp enough to demand immediate attention. He had a surrender ultimatum to deliver. Down below, at the moment the Varkai fleet began its advance into the inner system, all the displays in the main operations hall updated simultaneously. Vasquez was at the tactical table. Kane was next to her. Patel was 3 stations away, performing calculations on a separate screen. The room was full. All seats taken, all stations manned. "They are moving," said the tracking officer. "It was unnecessary. Everyone saw it on the displays, but people say obvious things when they are nervous." "How long until we are in range of the inner defensive systems?" said Kane. "At their current speed, approximately 11 hours. Vasquez nodded. "Is there any communication from their side?" "Not yet." She expected that. The Sulhari records described the Varkai protocol in detail. They would approach a position they deemed optimal, close enough to be visually intimidating, far enough to be outside the direct reach of any defensive response. And then they would send their message. The ultimatum was short, direct: surrender or be destroyed. The Sulhari had tried to negotiate. The Varkai gave them 48 hours and then attacked. The second civilization in the records, the Dressy Collective, tried to stall for time. Same result, different time, same outcome. Vasquez was not going to surrender and was not going to negotiate, but she was also not going to answer a surrender ultimatum in a way that would provoke an immediate attack before she was ready. She already had a very specific response written. It was not a capitulation, and it was not defiant. It was careful, precisely calibrated. 7 hours into the advance, the message came. It arrived on a wideband transmission that hit every receiver in the solar system simultaneously. The signal was accompanied by a translation key. The Varkai had done their homework with the survey data and translated their message into the most common human language, English, which meant their linguistic team was competent and their survey had been thorough. The message was read to the communication officers in the hall. Her voice was level and professional, which was absolutely correct. To the inhabitants of the planet designated as Earth, this is Fleet Commander Dath of the Varkai Empire speaking. The Varkai Empire controls 164 star systems and their associated worlds. Your civilization has been evaluated and found to be within the expansive borders of the Empire. You are offered one choice: peacefully surrender your world and accept integration into the Varkai Empire, or refuse and face the total destruction of your military capabilities and the occupation of your world by force. You have 12 of your planetary rotations to respond. Failure to respond will be viewed as a refusal to surrender. Silence in the hall. Then, from somewhere in the back of the room, one person started laughing. It was a short, involuntary sound, quickly suppressed. Vasquez didn't look to see who it was. She fully understood the impulse. She had already read the pre-approved response that the full Planetary Council had signed 2 days ago. In the event that the fleet arrived and issued exactly such a message, she had written it herself. "Send the response," she said. The communication officer sent it across the solar system. On the command deck of the Fist of Varkai, Fleet Commander Dath received the human response 11 minutes after the message was delivered. He read it on his personal display without expression. Then he read it again. It said, "Fleet Commander Dath, your message is received. We understand what you are proposing. We request an additional 24 hours for official consultation with our planetary governing bodies before providing a full response. Our preliminary position is that we do not intend to surrender. We request you hold your current position during this period. We also note that we are aware of your record of 164 victories. We have no doubt that you are an extremely capable military force. We want to inform you with respect that this situation may be different from those you have encountered before. We ask you to consider this carefully during the 2 4-hour period we have requested. Dath read it twice. Then he handed the tablet to Rose. Rose read it. He frowned slightly. Their language software is accurate. It is an authentic translation. Rose set the tablet down. They are stalling, Fleet Commander. The request for 24 hours is a delay tactic. Every civilization that knows it cannot win tries to buy time at the beginning. Yes, said Dath. The note that this situation is different is just defiance. Bravado. Yes, said Dath again. He fell silent for a moment. Give them 24 hours. Ross looked at him. Sir, their request is reasonable by the standards of civilized communication. We have 12 days until our operational deadline. We can afford 24 hours. He picked up the tablet again and looked at the last sentences of the message. And I want to know what they mean by different. It is bravado, sir, with all respect. Perhaps Dath put the tablet down, or perhaps he didn't. In any case, I would like to understand it before we begin. Continue monitoring all sensor readings, especially those weak energy signals. Ross confirmed and walked away. Dath spent the next hour reviewing the sensor data himself. The weak energy signatures he had noted upon arrival were still there, distributed throughout the inner system. They hadn't moved, they hadn't changed intensity. Whatever they were, they sat quietly, waiting. He couldn't fit them into any category he knew. During the next 24 hours, the whole worked at full capacity without stopping. The Shepard network conducted its final activation checks. The defensive grid over Earth passed its final readiness tests. Every human warship in the solar system moved to its designated position. These movements were made slowly, calmly, without large-scale maneuvers that might have looked like preparation for an attack. Vasquez was very specific about this. Do not do anything that looks aggressive. Do not do anything that looks rushed. Do not give them a reason to attack early. On the surface of Earth, the public was announced that a significant extraterrestrial contact event was occurring and that all citizens should shelter in place and follow emergency protocols. The message was cautious, calm, and intentionally sparse on details. There was some panic in the cities, but there was also something harder to describe in many places. A kind of collective, calming shoulders, straightening, jaws clenching. Humanity had feared many times before. Disease, its own weapons, storms, earthquakes, and famine. Fear was not new to them. What they did with it was, at the 2 4-hour mark, Vasquez sent the formal response. Dath received it and read it on the command deck, standing this time rather than sitting. Fleet Commander Dath. This is Defense Director Elena Vasquez, speaking on behalf of the unified government of Earth. We have concluded our consultations. Our position is final. We will not surrender. We have inhabited this world for 300 years. We have fought for it, suffered on it, nearly destroyed it ourselves, and survived. We have no intention of giving it to anyone. We are aware of your record. We respect the capabilities it represents. We also honestly tell you that we are prepared for this fight and ask you for the last time to reconsider your course of action. If you choose to advance, we will defend ourselves with everything we have. This is not bravado. It is a statement of fact. The choice is yours. Dath read it. Then he put it aside and said, All ships, battle stations, we are advancing to the inner system. The 40 ships of the Varkai fleet moved again, this time accelerating. The battle order was tighter, a more aggressive arrangement. The ships were positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire to protect each other's flanks, to react to an attack from multiple directions simultaneously. It was a formation the Varkai had used in most of their 164 campaigns. It had never failed. Dath stood at the main view screen and watched the yellow star get a little brighter as they advanced. Around it, the little blue-green world rotated on its orbit. Patient, as planets always are. He thought about the human director's response. One phrase stood out. 300 years. We have inhabited this world for 300 years. The Sulari had been a spacefaring species for 1,000 years when the Varkai destroyed them. The sovereignty of Talari, the most recent name on the wall, had existed for 800 years. Most civilizations the Varkai had fought were measured in centuries. 300 years. He did not know humans were so old. He put that thought aside. Age was not a weapon. Tactical, he said. What are the current readings of those unidentified energy signatures? The tactical officer checked his station. His face changed slightly, just a fraction. But Dath saw it. Fleet Commander, the signatures have changed. They are no longer weak. What does that mean? It means they have turned on, sir. The officer's voice was careful and controlled. All of them, simultaneously, in the last 4 minutes. There was silence on the command deck. How many? Said Dath. The officer performed a count. It took a moment, because the signatures were widely distributed throughout the inner system, and there were more than the sensor group had originally found. Many more, Fleet Commander. We are reading more than 3,000 individual power signatures. No one on the command deck spoke. Dath looked at his sensor display. The signatures were distributed throughout the inner solar system, each small, each now showing an active power level. They had been invisible upon arrival, or nearly so. Off, cold, waiting. Like something in hibernation. Like something that had been placed there intentionally, waiting for this exact moment. He thought about the words of the human director. We are prepared for this fight. This is not bravado. This is a statement of fact. All ships, shields at full power, said Dath. His voice was level. Weapons ready. Maintain formation. And throughout the inner solar system, in the 3,000 little vessels the Varkai had dismissed as debris upon first arrival, power levels continued to rise. They were not ships. That was the first thing the Varkai tactical teams established in the feverish 10 minutes after the signatures turned on. The 3,000 objects were not warships in any traditional sense. They had no crew section, no life support systems, no bridge, no command structure. They were machines, unmanned, about 2 meters long, having a shape unclassified in the Varkai database of alien weapon systems. Some were cylindrical, some angular. All of them were now pointed in one direction, at the Varkai fleet. Fleet Commander Dath stood before his sensor display and absorbed this information with a stillness his officers, who were watching him, found either comforting or terrifying, depending on how long they had served under him. Output power analysis, he said. The tactical officer, a calm professional named Vorel, was performing calculations. He had been performing them since the signatures spiked. His screen was full of numbers. Some numbers forced him to recalculate his estimates because the first results came out wrong, then the second results came out wrong too, and the third results were telling him something that was very difficult for him to express in a sentence. Fleet Commander, Vorel said cautiously, the individual output power of each unit is comparable to that of a light shuttle engine. So they do not threaten our shields individually, said Dath. No, sir. A pause. But they do not appear to be designed to operate individually. Dath looked at him. Explain. Power signatures. I have been observing the frequency modulation for the last 8 minutes. They are linked. Each unit in the network communicates with every other unit on a common frequency. It is a distributed system, not 3,000 separate weapons. The command deck processed this. Dath turned to his communications officer. Connect me with all fleet captains. In the hole, Vasquez watched the sensor displays with the same attention she had given them for the last 6 hours without sleep. The coffee next to her had gone cold. She hadn't noticed. Shepard network is fully activated, said Patel from his station. His voice had the strained tone of a man trying to sound calmer than he was. All 3,012 units are linked to the network and responsive. Central coordination is holding. How long until the optimal window for engagement? At their current closing speed, 14 minutes. They are still at long range. I wouldn't shoot at this distance. He hesitated. Director, I want to note again that we have never tested this system in full scale against a real fleet. Simulations suggest. I know what the simulations suggest, said Vasquez. I read them. When they are in the window, we shoot. Patel nodded and returned to his screens. Kane appeared at her shoulder. Our conventional forces are in position. If Shepard doesn't work as expected, we have fallback formations. Vasquez said nothing. She watched the approaching fleets on the main display, 40 red markers moving in tight order. Their battle configuration was clear, disciplined, tight spacing, overlapping defensive fields, exactly as the Sulhari records described. The Sulhari had tried to fight the Varkai with conventional warships. They had matched the Varkai formation with their fleet, exchanging fire, trying to use numbers and bravery to compensate for the technological gap. They lost 200 ships in 6 hours. Then they lost their home system. Then they lost everything. The lesson Vasquez had learned from that record was not that the Sulhari should have fought harder, but that they were fighting the wrong battle. The Varkai were superior in a conventional fleet engagement. There was no point in fighting them the conventional way. You don't beat the best boxer in the world by trying to box with him. Patel had understood this immediately 11 years ago when she first shared the Sulhari records with him. He had spent one evening reading the records, slept, and the next morning returned with a sketch on a notepad. It was rough, barely readable, but the concept was clear. You don't fight their ships, he had said. You fight the space between their ships. 11 years later, that sketch on a notepad had become the most expensive weapons project in human history, and it was about to be tested. Dath was 2 minutes from his communication with all captains when the first Shepherd units fired. The effect was not what anyone in his fleet expected, because they didn't understand what they were looking at. It was not a beam weapon, it was not a projectile, it was not any classified energy-type weapon that the Varkai database contained. What the front sensor operator on the destroyer Swift of the Varkai fleet described in a report that would be filed later was a spatial distortion event originating from outside the ship. The Swift of the Varkai was in the forward position of the left flank of the fleet. It was a fast destroyer 240 meters long, with a crew of 108. Its shields were at maximum power, and its weapons were ready. It was exactly where the battle formation required. It ceased to exist at 14:32 Geneva time on Tuesday afternoon. Not destroyed in a traditional sense. Not blown up in an explosion, leaving debris and energy signatures for sensors to track. The hull of the Swift, all 240 meters of its length, simply ceased to exist in its location and did not appear anywhere else where sensors could find it. Vanished. The fleet sensor network registered its disappearance as a glitch for 0.03 seconds. Then the computers caught up and reclassified the contact as destroyed. Dath was still on the all-captains channel. When it happened, he saw the Swift signal disappear on his tactical display. A ship that had been in his fleet for 3 years, manned by people he had personally vetted. "Swift, report," his communications officer said by procedure, even when you already knew. No answer. "Weapon signatures," said Dath. "Nothing we could classify, Fleet Commander. There was an anomalous signature at the Swift's position, approximately 0.04 seconds before the loss of its signal. We have no category for this reading." Dath kept his voice level. "All ships, evasive maneuver, maintain integrity of formation. Sensor teams, full analysis of the anomaly readings. Now." The fleet began an evasive maneuver. It was a good maneuver, precise, disciplined. A reaction that required years of training and expert execution at the fleet level without losing the integrity of the formation. The Varkai were very good at this. It didn't help. The second disappearance occurred 40 seconds later. The dreadnought Unshakable Fist, 1,200 meters long, 600 crew members, 4 massive main batteries capable of stripping the atmosphere from a small moon. There one moment, not there the next. No debris, no explosion. No last message from the crew, no wreckage flying from the point of impact. Nothing, just an absolute and total absence, like a light someone had switched off. In the hole, Vasquez watched the dreadnought's marker disappear from the tactical display. Around her in the room, it was so quiet she could hear the ventilation system. Then someone very quietly said, "Oh God," not out of fear, but out of awe. Patel was trembling slightly, she noticed. His hands on the keyboard were unsteady. He was looking at his screens with the expression of a man watching 11 years of his life either succeed beyond all he dared hope or fail in the most public way. He couldn't tell which yet. The numbers kept updating. The Shepherd units were cycling through their firing sequence. The network was functioning exactly as intended, even better than intended. The coordination delay was lower than the simulations had predicted, which meant the rate of fire was higher than expected. "It's working," said Patel. His voice was barely audible. "It's actually working." In space, the Varkai fleet was in trouble. The third, fourth, and fifth disappearances occurred within 90 seconds. A cruiser, another destroyer, a second dreadnought. Each of them disappeared without a trace, without debris, without that dying that ships are supposed to experience when they are destroyed. The Varkai sensor network was screaming with readings of anomalies that its analytical systems couldn't classify because they had never been programmed for it. Dath stood at his station and watched his fleet shrink on the tactical display, forcing himself to think clearly. Solve the problem, find the source, neutralize it. That was what the Varkai did. That was why they had won 164 times. Find the pattern, find the source, Neutralize it. Tactical. Track the anomaly readings to their points of origin. Varel was already doing it. He had been doing it since the first disappearance. The problem was that the anomaly readings didn't track to a single point of origin. They tracked to thousands of points of origin distributed throughout the inner system. Each was firing in coordinated sequences that Varel's analytical system was diligently trying to correlate. Fleet Commander. Source is distributed. 3,000 individual units. Each unit produces a local spatial distortion of limited radius and power. The units are linked by a network. They fire in coordinated sequences that create composite events at the target point. Can they be hit? Said Dath. Yes, sir. Their positions now read clearly. We can attack them. Do it. All main batteries. Priority to the nearest units. Destroy them. The fleet opened fire. The main batteries of the Varkai were powerful. They were among the most destructive directed energy weapons in the galaxy. They burned through standard battle armor at long ranges and, once, in the Talari campaign, cut a military orbital station in half with a 3-second burst. The Shepherd units had no battle armor. They were small, unshielded machines. The first Varkai volley cleanly destroyed 46 of them. Each hit, each vanished. 3,012 units became 2,966. The network didn't miss a single beat. The coordination frequency automatically adjusted for the missing nodes. The firing sequence continued. Another Varkai ship vanished. Dath understood then, not completely. Not so that he understood how the weapon worked on a physical level, but tactically, with the cold understanding that had made him the best fleet commander of his empire. He understood the math. 40 warships. They could destroy approximately 100 of these units per volley with coordinated fire if every ship were dedicated to that task. The network started with more than 3,000. To bring it below operational effectiveness, if it even had such a threshold, which was not guaranteed, they would have to dedicate every gun in the fleet to shelling targets distributed across a huge volume of space, while those targets actively destroyed his fleet one ship at a time. He couldn't fight a naval battle and destroy the network simultaneously. All ships, concentrate fire on the network units, he ordered. Destroy as many as possible, the fastest speed possible. The fleet was down to 34 ships. He saw it on the display, 34 ships firing everything they had. In the hole, Vasquez saw the incoming fire data and watched as Shepherd units were destroyed. The count dropped from 3,012 to 2,900 to 2,700. The Varkai were firing fast and accurately, and they were dealing damage. Will they reduce the network below the operational threshold? Said Kane. Patel shook his head. Not at this rate. For every device they destroy, they lose another ship first. The math is not working in their favor. How many ships do they have left? Vasquez asked. Patel checked. Display shows 32. On the tactical display, the red markers continued to go out one by one. The tempo was not frantic, but inexorable. Every 40 to 60 seconds, another ship ceased to exist. No debris, no distress signals, no escape pods broadcasting positions. Nothing remained of the ships the Shepherd network took. That was the point. That was the physics. Patel didn't tell anyone, not even Vasquez, the full detail of what the Shepherd units were actually doing. Not because it was secret, though it was, but because he wasn't sure anyone would have approved the project if they fully understood. The Shepherd units weren't destroying ships. They were moving them to a point in space approximately 4 light-years from the solar system, inside a region of dense molecular cloud, where navigation was practically impossible, and no inhabited world existed within reach of even a Varkai ship's fuel. He had decided to describe it to Vasquez as removing from the combat zone. She accepted this description. He watched as the red markers vanished and thought about what it meant to be a crew member on one of those ships. In one moment, in the solar system, in a battle, knowing where you were. In the next moment, somewhere else, in the dark, surrounded by a gas cloud, with no way to know where home was. He wasn't sure if it was more merciful or less merciful than being destroyed. He decided not to think about it too hard and returned to the engineering. On the Fist of Varkai, Dath's communications officer had been trying to contact Work Prime for the last 40 minutes. The message would take time to arrive, but he needed to send it. Fleet Command needed to know what was happening here, what weapons they had encountered. The physical readings his sensor team had gathered, incomplete and baffling, had to get to people who could properly analyze them. He also sent a personal message to Supreme Commander Zethgart. It was short. He didn't know how to make it longer. Supreme Commander, We are facing an unprecedented weapon. It leaves no debris. I do not understand its function. We have destroyed approximately 400 of their network units. They have more than 2,000 left, and the attrition rate is insufficient. I am going to attempt to retreat and regroup. I believe we need more ships and better information. 23 ships lost. No debris, no remains. Fleet Commander Dath. He sent the message and turned back to his tactical display. 18 ships now. The Shepard network was still firing, still coordinated, still inexorable. Fleet Commander, Ross said quietly. He had stood next to Dath's station for the last hour. Should we initiate the retreat maneuver? Dath looked at his fleet. 18 ships. 47 minutes ago, he had 40. The network still had more than 2,000 units in operating condition. His gunners were destroying them as fast as they could. But it wasn't enough, and everyone on the command deck knew it. He looked at the blue-green planet on the distant display, rotating, quiet. He thought about the message from the human director. This situation may be different from those you have encountered before. Not bravado, a statement of fact. Yes, he said. All ships, initiate retreat maneuver. Full engine power. We are leaving the system. These were the first words Dath had spoken in 4 campaigns in his entire career. The order to retreat was given at 16:04 Geneva time. The 18 remaining ships of the Varkai fleet turned, engines at full power, forming up as best they could, retreating from the inner system and heading toward the outer edge of the solar system and whatever lay beyond. The maneuver was clean, disciplined. Even now, with less than half the fleet, the Varkai performed the battle retreat just as they did everything else, with precision and control. Dath watched as the inner system remained behind on his rear sensor display. The planet, the orbital stations, the network. He watched as all that faded into the distance while his fleet gained speed, and for a short moment, something in his chest relaxed a little. They were moving. They were leaving. They still had 18 ships. The retreat was working. Then the sensor officer said, "Fleet Commander, the network units are moving." He turned. Moving where? "They are repositioning." The officer's voice was very careful. "Ahead of us. They are spreading into an intercept pattern." Dath looked at the tactical display. He saw it. The network units, those small, unmanned, inexorable machines, weren't just sitting in the inner system waiting for the Varkai to come to them. They were mobile. They could pursue. Of course they could. Of course they could. He looked at the numbers. How many network units had his fleet destroyed during the battle? More than 400. The network had started with a little more than 3,000. That left approximately 2,600 operational units, and they were now spreading out ahead of his retreating fleet in a pattern that was going to cut off the path of retreat. "Can we bypass them?" he said. The tactical officer performed calculations. It took 30 seconds. 30 seconds during which no one on the command deck spoke. "No, Fleet Commander. Their repositioning speed is sufficient to hold the intercept pattern ahead of us, regardless of course change at our current power output. Increase engine power anyway," he said. The engineer's report came back 2 minutes later. They could push the engines to 120% of nominal power. It could lead to engine failure. It might work. It didn't work. The network units were faster in their repositioning speed than the fleet was at 120% engine power. The intercept pattern held and narrowed as the Varkai ships moved faster. Each course change by the fleet was accompanied by a coordinated redistribution of the network units that maintained coverage on all vectors simultaneously. 11 ships, then 9, then 6, then the Fist of Varkai. Fleet Commander Dath was alone. He didn't know what had happened to the other ships because their signals simply vanished, just as every other ship in the fleet had, one by one. No final messages, no distress signals, no debris, just disappearances. Dath stood on his command deck and watched his tactical display. One ship, one red marker, alone in the far reaches of the solar system. Around him, the network units were repositioning for what was clearly the final battle sequence. He thought about many things in the next few minutes. He thought about Work Prime and the Wall and the 164 golden names. He thought about his captains and their crews, and where they might be now, if anywhere. He thought about the message from the human director, which he had read and reread many times since it arrived, and which he now understood in a way he hadn't when he first received it. 300 years. He thought about what a species looks like after 300 years of survival. After all the wars and plagues and disasters, they had clearly survived, because they were still here after watching the civilizations around them go extinct in the records. After receiving warnings from the Solari, perhaps just as they had received warnings that the Varkai had never seen after 11 years, or more, perhaps much more, of building something specifically for this, not for glory, not for expansion, because something was coming for them, and they intended to remain here when it happened. He sent one last message to Work Prime. It was short. He didn't know how to make it longer. Supreme Commander, 18 ships cannot retreat. The network possesses containment capabilities. All ships lost except the flagship. I do not expect to report again. I recommend not entering into further engagement with this species until the nature of their weapons is fully understood, if understanding is possible. They were prepared. They were always prepared. Dath sent it. Then he stood straight, folded his hands behind his back, and waited. The Fist of Varkai vanished at 1751 Geneva time. In the hole, the last red marker went out on the tactical display. A complete silence descended on the room. Vasquez stood at the table and looked at the display. Where there had been 40 markers representing the greatest fleet the Varkai had sent on a campaign in 20 years, there was now nothing. Empty space. The solar system looked the same as it had in the morning, except that the Shepherd units were now beginning their long, slow repositioning back to their sleeping positions in the inner system. 31 seconds of silence, then someone in the back started clapping. Slowly. One person, then two, then 10, then everyone. The whole hole. 240 people on duty in that room stood up at that moment and clapped until the sound filled the chamber and echoed off the walls. Some were crying, some were laughing, some were doing both at the same time, what people do when an emotion is too big to fit into one form. Vasquez didn't clap. She stood at the table, hands folded, and looked at the clear display. Not because she wasn't touched, but because she was thinking. Kane placed his hand on her shoulder for a moment. That was enough. Patel was still at his station, running calculations. He would be running calculations for hours, she knew, evaluating the network's performance, determining what worked exactly according to plan and what worked better or worse than expected. He would prepare a detailed and accurate report that would be classified for many decades. She would read every word. "What is the status of conventional forces?" she said when the applause died down. "No engagements," said Kane. "The network handled the entire battle. Our warships didn't even fire." "Good." She paused for a moment. "What about the other species out there? Those who are watching?" This was the second half of the question she had been thinking about for years. Earth was not alone in the galaxy. The Sulhari warning had made that clear, and the signals from the scout drone confirmed it over the years. There were other civilizations. Some of them were likely watching this solar system, she suspected, since the Varkai fleet had set out. Rumors spread among species that had reason to fear the Varkai. Some of these species had been carefully reaching out through years of intercepted signals and careful contacts on informal channels to see if Earth was aware of its situation. Earth had given those contacts cautious, evasive answers that amounted to, "We know, we are handling it. Please do not interfere." Now there was something to report. Vasquez sat down and began drafting a message. It was sent 12 hours later on the widest spectral broadcast that Earth's transmitters could muster. Not on the frequency the Varkai had used, but on the frequency the Sulhari had used for their warning. A frequency that humanity had always suspected other civilizations in the region were monitoring. The message was short. "This is Earth. The Varkai fleet sent to this system has been defeated. No ship was permitted to leave. No debris remains. We know that other civilizations in this region have experienced aggression from the Varkai Empire. We know their record of 164 victories. We also know that other species may have built defensive capabilities during this time. We offer the following to all civilizations under threat from the Varkai or any comparable aggressor. We are prepared to share the technologies and methods we used in this engagement. We ask for nothing in return, except that you use what we share to defend your peoples, not to become the next aggressors. We are not interested in empire. We are not interested in expanding our territory. We are interested in making the galaxy a more difficult place to bully. Earth out." Vasquez revised the message twice before sending. Kane suggested making it longer, but Patel suggested making it more technically accurate. She sent it as written. On Work Prime, the message from Dath arrived 6 weeks after the battle. Zethgart read it alone in the council hall, standing before the wall of proof. He had already been informed that the fleet hadn't returned. The first absence of a returning fleet in Varkai history. He had waited for Dath's final message, hoping it contained something he could use some analysis of what happened that he could pass to his scientists and engineers.